Stacey Rhodes is a psychotherapist and supervisor at the Center for CBT in New York City. She approaches therapy by utilizing supportive, encouraging, and strengths-based approaches and aims to help her clients in all facets of personal growth and discovery through cognitive, behavioral, mindfulness, and acceptance techniques, all rooted in cognitive behavioral therapy. Thank you so much, Stacey, for coming today to chat with me all about therapy.
Thank you.
Absolutely. We're happy to have you.
I'm happy to be here.
Good. I'm glad. Tell us about your work at the Center for CBT in New York City.
Sure. So I am an individual therapist at the Center for CBT in New York City, which is a small group practice where we practice cognitive behavioral therapy, and I'm also a supervisor to some of our amazing clinicians there.
For those that don't know, what is cognitive behavioral therapy?
So cognitive behavioral therapy is an evidence-based form of therapy that is all about the connection between your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, and how your thoughts impact your feelings, your behaviors impact your feelings. Mm-hmm. And so ultimately what we do is we work with clients on noticing their maladaptive habits of thinking or behaviors and how that's impacting their feelings, and work with some strategies and tools to be able to help come up with more helpful thinking patterns or behaviors that ultimately lead to people feeling more calm, more confident, more hopeful, things like that.
And so who is the best suited for cognitive behavioral therapy? Because therapy comes in many different forms.
Totally.
Approaches. So who would benefit the most from CBT?
So CBT has been proven to work really well for clients who are having symptoms of depression, anxiety, OCD, and phobias. There's also some trauma-focused cognitive behavioral work that we could do. So it does span a variety of people, but that's usually who we focus with.
Got it. If you work with somebody who has OCD and has different phobias and repetitive behavior of always turning the faucets off before bed because they're worried about the apartment overflowing, and that's just something that is in their thoughts and kind of affects their behavior. How would you go about treating that behavior and their symptoms?
Sure. So with OCD, actually, we would use a empirically researched part of CBT called exposure and response prevention. And so with OCD, you're ultimately having these obsessive or intrusive thoughts and feel that the only way to relieve them is by completing a compulsion. Right. And so what we would do in exposure response prevention, or ERP, is expose them to the feared scenario or the situation that's making them extremely anxious. And then the response prevention part is you don't complete the compulsion, and show them that you can handle these uncomfortable scenarios, you can handle that anxiety that comes up, but that the feared scenario doesn't actually usually happen. And so with your example of the faucets, what I would do is really have someone come in, and first the client and the therapist would make a hierarchy of sort of all of these feared scenarios that are making them anxious. And then we would ultimately just expose them to the thing that is making them anxious. So maybe that's not checking the faucets when they're getting ready to go to sleep, or even having the faucets run for an extended period of time and showing them that the house doesn't overflood. And so ultimately, there's maybe a little bit of the cognitive piece of sort of challenging this idea of how likely is it that the house would overflood, but really it's doing the exposure and response prevention work of showing them that you can do the thing and not have to complete the compulsion to relieve that anxiety.
Right, and so I use the faucets as an example. I mean, OCD goes in all different shapes and forms with the compulsions, intrusive thoughts, and it's not all about just a repetitive behavior necessarily. But have you seen your patients respond with CBT?
So with OCD, I mean, you're absolutely right. There are a whole variety of different kinds of compulsions, right? It's not just a behavior. Sometimes it's like a mental compulsion, or seeking reassurance from someone could be a compulsion. And so ultimately, we would really want to figure out what is the obsessive thought, what is the compulsion, whether it's, mental or a physical behavioral compulsion, and being able to show them. And I've seen, I mean, it works amazingly. It's very cool to be able to see a client go from maybe feeling really distressed in this anxious situation that they really want to complete this compulsion, but then they don't, and they see how their anxiety goes down, and they see how it works. And I think that's really cool to be able to watch.
No, it is. It's really cool.
Yeah.
I have personal experience with what you're talking about with OCD, so I get it completely.
It's awesome.
It is. It's really cool to see, for sure.
Yeah.
And it's nice to see also how a therapy such as CBT works. I mean, there's so many, different treatments.
Totally.
With, and approaches, and not everyone is as, visible or, to see like immediate results. I feel like CBT really does that. Not every therapy approach does that. So
absolutely, I agree. I think that's what drew me to practicing CBT in the first place, was just because, talk therapy I think definitely has a place and it can be very helpful, but I also see it's really nice for people who are experiencing, really hard, uncomfortable feelings to see relief. And I think that's really just what's so great about cognitive behavioral therapy in general.
I agree.
Yeah.
One thing that your practice does, and you're become heavily involved in your treatment with your clients there, is romantic relationships and just helping them navigate romance in any which way. So talking about just relationships and romance, how do you work with people? Like, how do they come in? Do they come in and say, oh, hey, I'm just struggling, with, X, Y, and Z problems. How can I fix them to find somebody? Or is it more like somebody comes in and saying, I'm having issues with my boyfriend or, spouse of any sort? How does that work? Because it's very unique to say, oh yeah, we work on, romantic relationships. It's one thing to talk about couples therapy and, divorce and all of that, but working on finding romance is certainly a niche that's very particular.
Sure. So our practice does all of that, right? We also have the couples therapy and the working through divorce and things like that. But one way that I work with clients a lot on relationships is same way, through a cognitive behavioral lens. And it sort of depends. It's like all of those ways that you described. It's sort of they're coming in because they're having a hard time with dating, or they're having a hard time with communicating with their partner, or even something like totally different, that it's just, I'll often work with clients on more of the individual piece of like what is impacting them that's making it hard to be in a relationship. So sometimes that's like self-worth work or self-esteem.
Right.
So ultimately it's kind of all about challenging the thoughts that are impacting whatever is hard about being in a relationship, finding a relationship, that sort of thing.
Okay, it encompasses a lot of different things.
Absolutely.
So within patients that you treat, how have you seen, have you seen like a pattern of romantic issues with people with OCD or ADHD, or do you think it's just general, like?
I think we're all human, and we all come to relationships with our own ideas and thoughts about ourselves or our partners or what a relationship should look like. And so I think it's really not diagnosis specific. It's really about the individual's experience within dating or a relationship.
Right. And I mean, and it takes work, but But if you notice, like, I guess maybe then going back a little bit to like ADHD and OCD and those even that have, suffer from depression or whatnot, necessarily, OCD or another complex disorder. What are you seeing like being presented the most these days?
I mean, people are really anxious, and I've seen a lot of feelings of hopelessness and disconnection, right? I mean, which I think contributes to dating and relationships.
Of course.
And so I think with COVID, it's been really hard for a lot of people. Like being isolated has been really hard for a lot of people. And so really, I'm just seeing a lot of like sadness and also just the everyday stressors, right? I mean, we all are still showing up for work, or especially now with like this recession or a lot of people getting laid off, there's a lot of anxiety. So it
covers the gamut. Do you find people that have some type of disorder to be more anxious or to be more distressed than others, or do you think it's just covering? Doesn't matter.
Yeah, I mean, I think like those of us, and like I say me too, right? Who are sort of just a slightly more anxious brain, then will experience a little bit more anxiety depending. But I think COVID was like a trauma that we all experienced at the same time together, and so I think it's really impacted most people.
Oh, of course it has. I mean, without a doubt. It's an unfortunate time, and I know that mental health professionals are probably, or at least from what I've heard, are been most, I don't want to say impacted, but been most also like needed during this time. And I know a lot of professionals that have been overworked and taking on so many new clients that they never saw because this was a huge health crisis in America. And I mean, technically it's global, but I'm just talking about America, for instance. So somebody is presenting with symptoms of mental health, so basically anxiety, depression, OCD, ADHD, issues with relationships. And they don't really know like what path to go. What advice would you give them as to how they should approach, getting help and who they see?
I think they should do the research, right? See sort of what mode of therapy fits in line with what they are interested in, with what they like. I guess I'm a little biased to CBT.
As you should.
But I think I always will say to clients, like, shop around for therapists and look to see what modality works the best for you, what therapist and individual works the best for you, and to sort of, I don't know, I think just also asking for help is like a huge feat. And so to just go out and say, I need help, and even if the first therapist isn't the right fit, then they can help you find the right fit or something like that. I think it's important to just ask for help and sort of see what works best for you.
Right. And so are there like organizations or different, I guess, websites that like are geared towards helping you find the right therapist?
I mean, Psychology Today is a huge one. They have like a bunch of therapists have profiles on there. I would say just Google, truly. Google, do a little bit of research, see if you want to go through insurance, ask your insurance company. I think it sort of depends on the person, but I think if you're interested in learning more about a specific kind of therapy, read about it, just look it up.
Sounds great. Great advice. Thanks so much, Stacey.
Absolutely.
For coming.
Thank
This
you.
was lovely.
Thanks.
Absolutely.